in one way, we've kind of painted ourselves in a corner where we can't go too far or it won't be us. And then in another way, there's still lots of room to explore where it's still our sound and kind of like, I hate to keep using this word, but like our system, it's like the way we run things.
Welcome to the Dreams of Consciousness podcast. If you'd be so kind, would you mind introducing yourself?
Paul Ledney, Profanatica.
And Paul, how would you describe the music of Profanatica?
Right now, I would say black death metal.
Okay. And early on when you formed the band, how would you describe your original sound?
Original sound was pure black metal, because back then in 1989, 90, 91, true black metal was black death metal before the European sound. They kind of hijacked it, if you will, like they kind of redefined the term of what it was. But if you go back to 1990, you'll see that most of the bands from back then played an evil style of death metal, and that was considered black metal before the change. Like there was us, Rotting Christ, Blasphemy, Beherit, Absu, Impaled Nazarene, and all of those style. Everybody had their own kind of style back then, and it was more based on like death metal, but more evil.
And would you say that that's the defining characteristic of black metal? Evil?
Yeah, but also I would say aggressiveness, and a lot of bands seem to have like lost that aggressiveness and favor more melodic and what they like to call atmospheric nowadays.
Right. They call it atmospheric. How would you describe it?
Weak. Like no bass at all. And like doesn't sound evil to me. So they also like, I guess, redefine the term what people think is evil. Like I don't hear any really haunting stuff from any of these new black metal bands, and new meaning anything after, let's say, 2000.
So when people hear this podcast, this will be the fourth interview with a U.S. black metal band, or a band that gets categorized as U.S. black metal. You know, I think whether or not the bands themselves consider their music black metal is up for debate, I guess. It differs from band to band. The interesting thing is I asked the question, what is black metal, to all the bands that get or describe their sound as black metal. Most of them don't refer to the music. I think you're the first person who actually referred to the music as needing to be aggressive.
Yeah.
Referring to a specific sound.
Yeah, it's more of a style than it is a location. For instance, like a lot, not all, but most of the US bands, they might say US black metal, but they're saying it from where they're located rather than like what the style is. So to me, I'm not going to name names, but a good 90% of them say US black metal. What it is, especially all the newer bands, is like a cheap copy of a Scandinavian sound. You know, it's like Dark Throne Part 20, if you will. It's just the same stuff kind of rehashed over and over. And also with these new bands, there's a lot of the influences aren't there. It's more of a copy. Because back in 1990, we were influenced by Sarcophago, Necrovore, Possessed Seven Churches. Everybody's heard me talk to death about these things. But we listened to it so much, it became a part of us that it's like built into our influences, which kind of formed our style, rather than us saying, let's just copy. We like this and we want to sound like this too. That's why a lot of these like so-called US black metal bands that are around today, they have the first album sounds nothing like the new one. Whereas I like to think that sometimes we've had some like audio upgrades and some audio downgrades depending on where we recorded and who produced it. But our kind of system, if you will, is like exactly the same as when we started. Like it's still us, if that makes sense.
Yeah. You feel Profanatica's music has been consistent from the beginning?
I do. And some of the earlier stuff that's very lo-fi is what a lot of people latched onto. They also liked how like I arranged things in the past. And that lo-fi is mainly due to like recording costs that we had back in the day. We didn't have a lot of money or nobody really backing us. And mixed with some poor choices that I made, like, oh, let's record with this guy. He did this band or that band, stuff like that.
Right. But stylistically, you've stayed, pardon the phrase, but you've stayed true to what you initially set out to accomplish with Profanatica, right?
Yeah, for sure. And in one way, we've kind of painted ourselves in a corner where we can't go too far or it won't be us. And then in another way, there's still lots of room to explore where it's still our sound and kind of like, I hate to keep using this word, but like our system. It's like the way we run things.
Right. I'm curious, you had roots with the death metal scene, and you started Profanatica at a time when the U.S. black metal scene, at least, was not very well defined, or there weren't a lot of bands for you to play with or to be associated with. Why did you choose one over the other?
To me, it wasn't like, looking back, it to me, like, Profanatica is closer to somebody like Incantation than not. It just aesthetically, we were like a little bit different, and I had some blasphemous ideas that I wanted to pursue in terms of like look and feel and how we presented ourselves. But that, like, it, like if you look at Incantation, Golgotha, it all comes from the same source. I feel we all listened to the same stuff. John was heavy into Seven Churches and the Necrovore demo. It's like we're like more of a stripped down version of that, kind of more in your face. It doesn't seem that different to me. Where it's like, I left Incantation. I wanted to do something more black metal, which is true, but it's not that different, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, musically, it seemed like the difference between what was black metal back then and what was death metal back then was, I think musically, the death metal band started moving in a direction that was much more technical, or, like almost hyper, and the arrangement started getting more complicated. Whereas I think, you mentioned Possessed, you mentioned Sarcophago, like a lot of that stuff, a lot of the black metal of the late 80s and early 90s was very much in keeping with, simpler song structures and simpler riffs.
That's true. So yeah, I guess in that respect, it's different. That's one of the things that makes it different. Sure.
But was that your intention? Did you want to keep the music simpler and more raw, the way Sarcophago and Possessed were?
Whatever we did back then was kind of like came out naturally. So I definitely had our look and feel planned out. And I don't remember making a conscious decision to have it stripped down and more simple. Maybe I did, but I can't really remember. Like, so I know when the subject of like guitar solos came up, we were not into it. And I was like, no, we're not doing a solo. Let's just blast. So I guess I did, but I didn't call it that. It's just the way I described it back then. Like, let's just kind of like power through the song. We don't need a solo or any weird changes. And I think that's what gives it, the old stuff, especially, like that certain type of magic, that it is like so simple, and that we were deadly serious about it. We weren't kidding. And the other thing was like that mindset. Our mindset was way different than all the other bands back then, as to where we were like, it was almost like a competition with, at least with our first lineup, when we would hear something. And we had friends, of course, and the scene that we'd traded with and like the guys in Beharit, Pale Nazarene. But in terms of the death metal bands, even though we were friends with all those guys back then, we always looked at ourselves like we were ahead of the game and kind of on a higher level than them, no matter how popular they were.
A higher level in what way?
Probably, I can't name names again, but probably mostly in the way of how we believed in our own, what we were saying and doing. We felt we were better at being Profanatica than they were at being their own bands. It was more of like a friendly party to all them. Like if you read old interviews and zines from the first black metal wave, or it'd be like the second wave now, those guys were like sick of the death metal kids always like partying and everybody was all friends and it was like a happy time. Whereas back then we were just like, those people could fuck off kind of thing. Even though we were kids ourselves,
yeah,
we had gotten into it a lot earlier than them. So think about it. If you're into the scene for like a year and a half, 2 years, and new people come along and they're like, hey, we want to do this stuff too. You see it now with like the older people get accused of like gatekeeping, because it seems like there's not repercussions, but it seems that everybody could do whatever they want. And there's like no, like you can't, I don't know what the word is I'm looking for, but there's like no, I guess, repercussions. You know what I mean? Like people could, back then, if you did something kind of stupid, like you'd hear about it. Word traveled fast, even without the internet. Like people would be like trading demos. It'd be like, these guys are posers at the end of the letter. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it wasn't as fast as like sending an email, but like word got around, and especially in the magazines. Now nobody seems to be paying their dues. And as long as you sound like the new hottest band, you have like 130,000 Facebook likes almost immediately.
So even though the roots of Profanatica go back to almost the first wave, it took you a while before you were able to record a full length. Why was that?
There is huge gaps of time between stuff, and I didn't have like a steady lineup of people that had the same goal as me during certain like incarnations of Profanatica. So the most I was able to get out of like a backup band was like an EP. And while we took it seriously, my head wasn't always in the game. Like once we did it, it was on. But I was disenchanted with the scene and how everybody got away with like mediocre bullshit. It just seems like nobody believed in what they were doing. It's 10 times worse now, but I let that kind of stop me because I knew what we had was real and what they didn't wasn't. And I was kind of consumed with that back then. Whereas now I don't really give a shit. And I am thinking like the phonies will get weeded out, or they used to be weeded out. So you will see like huge gaps of like us working. I wish back then that I had just, now it's, we've been working at it kind of steady since 2016. I like to say like that even though there's like a long history, we kind of own, at least for me, I just started pushing it since 2016. So that's when I said, like, I'm going to kind of do this for real and see what happens and stick to our guns and not really change anything, but work at it a little more serious.
Yeah. I mean, in the 90s, it must have been hard for you to find people to collaborate with, right? People who understood what you were doing.
Yeah. And we would borrow people, or I would borrow somebody who kind of got it and was willing to kind of go along with it. So we would do an EP and maybe like one or two shows. Instead of now, we would try to do like a full length and do like as much touring as possible off of that.
Have you always handled all of Profanatica's songwriting?
Yes. And like once I show people kind of like how I do things, then I could let them like take the reins. And so what I'll do is like, I'll once we decide like on a guitar player or start practicing, I'll write a lot of riffs on a keyboard, give them those riffs and let them kind of play with it. But almost more often than not, when they're working on stuff and sending me riffs, they always have it to a little bit different drum beat than I imagine. Like it's two different imaginations going. So now the lineup that we did Crux Simplex with, we were able to practice once or twice a week at least for like a good year to put this material together, and that helped a lot because we're all local.
Out of curiosity, why do you write on a keyboard?
I don't know how to play guitar, and for me I could hum stuff too, but it's the best way for somebody, I think, that doesn't know how to play guitar to like get an idea across.
Interesting.
And then play, what I'll do is, so the fifth song, Compelled by Romans on Crux Simplex, I wanted the guitar player to like capture the soul of Once Removed Savior, but come up with something a little bit different because I wanted something a little bit slower in the middle of the album.
Okay. Have you ever released your keyboard demos?
No.
Okay.
No.
It would be interesting to hear that just from a process perspective.
So what I prefer to do, and not everybody likes this, is I prefer to have like more of an unplugged writing session with a notepad or the iPad, and just so I could talk while we're doing it rather than just jam out parts and see where they go, like at full volume. For me, I get a lot more done if I could like talk through the practice itself.
Can you tell me a little bit about your approach to playing drums? Because with Profanatica, you do something different than I think what people expect from black metal drumming.
Okay, so what I'm doing is kind of like a souped up version of rock drumming, where the new drummers, and I say new, like, that came on in the 2000s up till now, their hands and feet are highly skilled, and they're much more skilled than I, but they have really low drumming IQs as to where to put hits in and cymbals. And I can't stress that enough. Like, people have used the word tasteful, but there's certain things, like as a drummer, and I've always been like this even since I was a kid. I was able to talk to one of my first drum teachers I ran into like at a outside party one time, and I was asking him who he liked and he listened to band and bought me. And it was kind of fascinating, the drummers that he mentioned that he grew up listening to, because if somebody likes somebody and it strikes a chord with them, you can't really help that. Like, where you are in your life when you first heard it, people will remember, like, somebody plays guitar and they worship this older guitar player that they were a kid, they listened to this guy, but he was naming off guys and I'm like, that guy sucks. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And this my drum teacher was really good back then, and he's amazing now. And I said, you're way better than that guy. But they don't like view it like that. A lot of people, he still has like his favorites for when he was a kid. So my drumming, I'll say it's like souped up based on rock drumming, but there's certain things that I will and won't do. And I always start on a snare and hi-hat for my blasts, or what I call a pounding beat or a pulling beat. I never start on the bass drum and the hi-hat first for a blast.
Right.
Which, it's like 99% of the people will start on the bass drum and the hi-hat, and it just sounds wrong to me. And I want to say that's like a huge part of why I sound different than anybody else. And where I got that was the song Iron Maiden by Iron Maiden. That's like a perfect example of that. I don't know if you have the ability to put a link up, but so people could kind of hear the difference. That's kind of where I got that.
Right.
And this old Black Sabbath song, The Writ, off of Sabotage, at the very end, he's doing that same beat, just a hair slower.
Yeah.
And many people have done it, but that's kind of where I got it, those two things.
That's interesting.
Dave Lombardo could do both, by the way. Like, I can do that beat, that, like, bass drum and hi-hat first, which is interesting because a lot of sound guys will ask the band, like, do you want kick drum in the monitor? And they're like, no, snare, because like the snare and hi-hat for us always is on the one beat.
Yeah.
So the other thing is that when doing it opposite of what I do, there's way more tools available to you, in terms of like fills, starting with fills. And I don't really have a lot of options since I chose to play that style.
Given that you also handle the vocals, do you sometimes use your cymbal work to accentuate your vocal patterns?
I don't really use a lot. Like the cymbals, in my opinion, are for accents. That's it. And I see people overusing them, and I've tried to use them a little bit more because there's very little cymbals in as compared to other bands in our music. So, or either that or they're mixed a little bit lower than everybody else's. It's just, in my opinion, they're only for accents. And I see people like wailing on them or just having them all over the place and to fill like space almost. I feel like it's overused and not really needed. I was thinking about doing like a video demo of how I could play, so how I play, so people could kind of see it. Once they hear me talk about it and like kind of show it, it makes a lot more sense as to why I am like playing like that.
So the latest Profanatica album is called Crux Simplex, and it was released in September through Season of Mist. Paul, when did you start working on this album?
Probably from now, when it just came out, probably a good year and a half ago.
Did you go into this album wanting to do anything different from the previous album?
We did. We wanted this to be focused mainly on heavy guitar work and vocal. So we made a conscious decision to mix the drums down in the mix a little bit and have like a more heavier death metal production.
You mentioned the bass lacking in a lot of modern black metal bands or US black metal bands. Is the bass an important part of your sound? What do you say?
It is. We need like heavy bottom end, and I feel that like you could really, if you see us live, you could kind of get that feel that I'm always talking about.
Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit about the concept that links the songs together?
So what this is the first 10 Stations of the Cross, just kind of bastardized, and it kind of goes in order from when he was condemned to death, and then 10 all the way up to 10 Division of Robes. So it kind of follows that path. It's almost a concept album.
Where did the idea of using the Stations of the Cross come from?
My ideas will like hit me at any time during the day. And I would just kind of laugh to myself, and I was like, I have to do this. I can't believe I didn't do this. This is great.
Yeah.
And it almost, I mean, the one thing that's different about this album than the last ones is that I took more care in each syllable and how they fit together. And there's a lot more vocals in this than the previous ones. A lot of lyrics in this.
Why the first 10? Why not all 14?
Honestly, because I kind of made a mistake and I thought there were only 10. And then we kind of ran out of time. So we will have to, which we're kind of working on right now, finish it and do the last 4, maybe on an EP or something.
Profanatica has always been known for the blasphemous lyrics. I'm curious if that's something that came from your background or if it's just something you liked about black metal.
Well, all right. So we were influenced by Sarcophago in Rye, and when that we had already had talks of doing another band like that, and it just that so our style black metal, we couldn't do another style without the blasphemies. Like that just kind of came out of us.
Okay.
So it was like natural that was part of it, probably due to religious upbringings.
Yeah.
And the information is fascinating still. So we're still not sick of it. We have a lot more to say.
Where did you end up recording the album?
So we recorded it at my friend's studio, Dead Lamb Studios, and Arthur Risk got the final mix and mastering credits for that.
Do you want to mention who your friend was who engineered the album?
No, he doesn't want to be named.
Okay. He doesn't want to be associated with Profanatica, or?
I guess so, yeah.
All right, fair enough. But why did you choose your friend's studio? Was it just convenient?
We rehearsed there. It's like state of the art. And he's done like some other bigger bands that he doesn't want us to mention too. But I think he knows our style. And it's in terms of like engineering, was really the most efficient I've ever seen. So it was kind of painless going in there.
From an engineering or production standpoint, is it tricky capturing your sound? Because to a certain extent, it needs to be raw, right?
It does. And I think that rawness comes from our playing and our intent more than the production. And well, once the vocals are on, you could kind of like hear how angry we were. And hopefully that comes across.
Yeah. You mentioned Arthur Rizek handled the finishing touches on the production. Why Rizek?
Because we I felt we deserved like a not polished but a bigger sound. That was we made a decision to go more of a sound with some bite rather than decay, which is like bathed in reverb, like some of our older ones, or the Rotting Incarnation of God had a lot of reverb on it. I wanted the opposite, so it was like right in your face. The difference is that with the one we just chose, like more bite, more of like a heavy death metal production, but our style of black metal, I think it fits. And I also, one of the other things is you can't disguise and kind of hide under the reverb, whereas a lot of mistakes will show. It's a little bit cleaner this time.
Yeah. When you first heard those super trebly, high gain productions coming out of Scandinavia, what was your reaction to that?
We were laughing. and back then, like, opening beers and literally just laughing at it. Whereas to like somebody would be watching a comedy.
Yeah.
And we didn't just hear it and be like, oh, that's not our style, but good for them. We were like, that fucking sucks. How could people like this and buy into it? Because you go back and play it, like when we ever at any of our shows, the sound man is constantly, because they think that's what like a real black metal is, because they've been told that.
Right.
And I always go and say, could you shut this shit off and put on something good? And they're like, what's good? And I'm like, Archgoat or Black Witchery, put on something a little heavier.
Yeah. It's interesting because you guys have you specifically have your roots in, the earliest part of that scene. But I don't know. I mean, I personally, I got into this stuff in the mid 90s, and so I didn't find out about Profanatica until much, much later, probably about 15 years later.
Mm-hmm.
And by that point, like the idea of what black metal was kind of taken over by what the Scandinavian bands had been doing.
Sure.
And so it's interesting. Like, do you find like there's a little bit of a culture clash between yourself and the kids who came into this much later?
Yeah. A lot of times they'll be like, oh, it's interesting to hear your side or your take. And I'm like, it's not my opinion. It's like what happened.
Yeah.
Because I watched it like evolve into this. And that's fine too. Like some people like horror movies, some people like comedies. I always say, like, this is not the same music though. It's, we don't like that shit, and you can't really compare us to them. It's two different styles. And I get it that a lot of people like both. Well, some people like the war metal style, and they separate that from people like both. Like some people will just call like the stuff that I like war metal,
right?
And then they'll call like a more European or Scandinavian sound that's more melodic black metal.
Right. I think part of the issue is the life cycle of the average metal fan is 5 to 8 years. And so whoever was around from, the late 80s, early 90s version of black metal or death black metal wasn't around when the Scandinavian bands became really big. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There wasn't anybody to really set the record straight.
There wasn't. And there was a handful of bands that kind of the beginning bands I mentioned before that were kind of fought against that. Any of the old zines had bands like us back then. And actually the one band that was kind of doing that, besides like Samael, who was like the very tail end of the first wave, was Immortal.
Yeah.
So those guys like were doing that, their end of it, it's like a different slant when we were doing our things back then, because they were around back then.
Yeah. I mean, pre-internet, it was hard for, and this is something that I bring up a lot. You spoke to Daniel, who wrote the book about U.S. black metal.
Mm-hmm.
And, part of the problem that a lot of black metal bands had in the U.S. was just finding people to work with. And you really see the U.S. black metal scene take off. I mean, whether or not you agree that those bands are black metal or not, but you see the scene take off when people were able to record on their own without needing to find, 2 to 3 other people to help them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
That's part of it.
Did you ever consider going down that route and just recording everything yourself?
I did with Have a Hedge. And what I'm doing is with that, I'm using like industrial style tools to create black metal, but it takes so long to put together. I did. And that's kind of what came out. So essentially, like, I was playing guitar on a keyboard, a sampled guitar, and it was so low, it's kind of sounded like an explosion. And it was a noisy. So instead of that, I just kind of looped an explosion, which takes place of guitar and bass.
Right. But in terms of like picking up a guitar yourself and handling the riffs yourself, that wasn't something you were interested in?
No. Because it's almost like learning a whole other language.
Yeah.
The way I wanted it, because I always say, like, to be in Profanatica, you have to be way better than you need to be. And another thing is, like, if somebody grew up playing the Scandinavian style, as good as some of those guitar players are, some are amazing, they would not be able to cut it in Profanatica. Like, they don't have that, like, strong picking hand or the mindset, unless you have to come from a death metal background to understand or a punk background.
It's a lot of down picking, right?
Yeah.
I correct in saying that you recently came back from a tour? Or you did a tour earlier this year?
I did. It was for the West Coast. We did a European tour, then took a short break, and then did a West Coast run. And now in mid-November, we're going to do 20 dates on the East Coast.
Who are you playing with?
We're supposed to be with Panzerfaust in the West, and they were like a really good fit because they have a different style, good draw, great guys. And then I think Nunslaughter is going to join us for the first half. Yeah.
What about next year? Do you guys have anything planned? You mentioned that you wanted to put more focus on Profanatica. I'm curious what that means from like a touring or a promotional standpoint.
All right, so we're already working on new material, and I don't have anything planned yet, like no dates, but we'll do like another US run in 2024 and a European run in 2024 and try to hit some festivals.
Very cool.
If we can.
Out of curiosity, since there's a little bit of this rivalry with the European scene, how do you go over when you play Europe?
So we have like good places and some not so good places. And we did really well in Sweden. We have friends there. Italy's good for us. Paris is good for us. Czech Republic and Poland. And unfortunately, everywhere else, and I can't blame us for this. This is like arms folded, head bobbing up and down, and that's about all you're going to get out of them. So for me, that's what they think goes on at a black metal show, but it's not, because Italy has like real passion for it, right? So as soon as we start, they know it's hard. We're going hard, and they're going hard, and it's like this energy back and forth. And then the next night we might, or the next week or whatever, couple days, we might hit Germany, and it's arms folded. And they're like, and I get it, there's a lot of shows over there, but I'm also thinking they have the internet. Can't they see how other people behave at a metal show?
It's a little bit of a cultural thing, I think, because
it is.
I do work with some people from different parts of Europe, and they can be kind of stiff.
Yeah.
They're not used to showing a lot of emotion.
They're not. So I can't really blame them, but I do blame them since they live there and they are doing it. You know what I mean? It might not be their fault. But the other thing, and I started getting vocal and telling them, and like live and even after, I'm not going to give you like 40 minutes of foreplay so you could get into the last song. You know what I mean?
Well, what's the appropriate response to a Profanatica song? What do you want to see crowds do?
A headbanging.
Yeah.
It would be the ultimate thing.
Absolutely.
If they're like true metalheads, and of course, like just raging in the front, which we get in Poland.
Yeah.
And those people, I've seen the same people like in Germany and other places that like Profanatica. I know they have the patches, they know the songs. And then after, they were like, we loved it. And I'm like, I wouldn't have known. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they can be very reserved people. That's my take on it.
Yeah. But it's weird. You would think they'd see other people doing it and be like, you know what? It's okay that we could like go a little crazy.
Maybe along with your drum tutorial videos or your drum playthroughs, you can put a how to headbang at a Profanatica show.
When we played in Spain, I kind of insulted them a little bit and called them statues, and they were like upset about it, but they're like, we're feeling it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, then go feel it somewhere else. You won't clap like that. And then it got back to like our booker guy, and people were like calling the club and complaining about me. But I said to them, I'm like, you're mad at yourself. You're not mad at me.
Yeah. So, Crux Simplex is out now through Season of Mist Records. Paul, what's the best way to get the album?
Okay, the best way to get Crux Simplex is through Season of Mist. And in the US, I think Hell's Headbangers is one of the distros here. You'll see it pop up if you look around for your favorite distro. And my suggestion is that the first time you hear it, it would be best if you used headphones and just kind of sat there and paid attention to it and like followed along the stations. And that's probably the best way to get the most out of it.
Do you want to say anything about the vinyl versions and the physical releases that Season of Mist is putting out?
I don't know if the colored ones are all gone. It seems like that they had very limited left last time I checked. But the cover looks fantastic on the 12-inch, I think.
And if people want to follow Profanatica online and get all the tour dates for the shows that you mentioned, what's the best way to do that?
Probably just the Facebook, Profanatica Facebook. And if somebody messages me, that I'll get the message personally through the Facebook. And then we have a Profanatica official Instagram, which we kind of just started. Supposed to be putting like some older photos up as I like slowly dig them out. We'll post the tour dates there too.
Very cool. Is there anything else you want to say?
No, thanks. Thanks for like taking the time to talk to me. We're like 100% happy with the way Crux Simplex came out. So this is what we are, like where we come from. So I hope people like it.
Appreciate it, Paul. Thanks.